forest looks peaceful at night, but that silence is a trick. Every branch holds a warning. Every patch of darkness hides a question your eyes cannot answer. Yet the native scouts of the old nations moved through this world as if the night belonged to them. They crossed cold valleys, slipped between cedar trunks, and drifted over leaf beds without stirring a single sound. Here's the strange part. While most people fear the dark because they cannot see, native scouts used that darkness as their greatest ally. The night didn't swallow them. It protected them. Imagine standing at the edge of a dense woodland during a moonless night. You hear the wind. You hear the creak, but you don't hear footsteps. A scout could be 3 meters away, watching you, measuring your breathing, tracking the rhythm of your movements. You would never know. That level of invisibility wasn't magic. It was skill practiced since childhood, sharpened during hunts, perfected during war, and trusted during long journeys where a single mistake could cost a life. Most people move loudly without realizing it. They push weight into their heels, crush twigs, shift balance too quickly, and let panic decide their pace. Native scouts learned the opposite. They let the forest tell them how to move. They read the ground with their feet the same way their eyes read the stars. They stepped on the sides of their feet to avoid snapping sticks. They felt for hollow patches that echoed beneath them. They tested the tension of snow crust before committing their full weight. Here's the catch. Walking quietly was only half of the challenge. Seeing through darkness mattered just as much. Human eyes aren't built for night, but native scouts trained theirs until shadows became maps. They knew that vision isn't about brightness. It's about contrast. They learned to let their eyes adjust slowly, to avoid staring directly at dark shapes because the edges reveal more than the center. The weird part is that they rarely relied on sight alone. They used sound, smell, air temperature, and the subtle movement of branches to build a picture far richer than any flashlight could reveal. They trusted their ears to hear the soft hiss of disturbed grass. They used their skin to feel shifts in wind direction. They recognized the scent of broken sap, wet soil, or a recent animal trail. In the dark, the entire forest became a sensory language. But here's where the pain enters. Moving through a pitch-black forest wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. A wrong step could break a leg. A loud mistake could alert an enemy. A moment of hesitation could lose a trail that had taken hours to interpret. Scouts needed calm minds in a place that frightened most people. They walked with patience stronger than fear. They survived with attention sharper than fear. And they returned home carrying knowledge that wasn't written in books, but in silence. You might think this is impossible for modern people to understand. But the deeper you explore, the stranger the truth becomes. Silent walking wasn't just a technique. It was a worldview built on respect for the land, trust in the senses, and an understanding of darkness as a living partner, not an enemy. The night didn't blind them. It revealed everything. And once you see how they unlocked the hidden physics of silence and night vision, the forest around you will never feel the same again. Most people imagine night as a wall, an obstacle that blocks every sense and forces the body into fear. But to native scouts, darkness was never a wall. It was a filter. It removed distractions, softened the world, and revealed patterns that daylight often hid. Here's where things become unexpectedly brilliant. Silence and night vision were not separate skills. They were two sides of the same instinct. An instinct built from listening to the environment rather than fighting it. When the sun disappeared, the forest didn't become invisible. It simply switched to another language. Shadows told stories. Temperature shifts revealed direction. The forest floor, which looked flat during the day, exposed dips, ridges, and soft trails that held heat differently after sunset. Scouts learned to read these invisible gradients with the edge of their foot, not their eyes. A cold patch meant open ground. A warmer patch meant recent movement by an animal or person. Something that subtle would go unnoticed to most of us, but to them it was as clear as a footprint in snow. Human eyes rely on rods, not cones, to see in low light. Rods don't detect color, but they excel at detecting motion and contrast. Scouts understood this instinctively. They never stared directly into darkness. They kept their gaze soft and slightly off-center, letting the edges of their vision detect movement long before their conscious mind processed it. Strange as it sounds, the less they tried to see, the more their eyes revealed. It's the opposite of what modern people do when they panic and strain their eyes, destroying their night adaptation instantly. There's another overlooked insight that changed everything. Sound behaves differently at night. Cool air pushes sound farther. Moist soil absorbs noise. Pine needles mute footsteps. Frosted leaves crack sharper than dry leaves. Native scouts mapped these textures through memory. They knew which part of the forest hummed quietly and which part betrayed every move. They shifted routes constantly, choosing paths where the ground swallowed sound instead of bouncing it back. Here's the surprising twist. Night vision wasn't always visual. It was multisensory. Scouts blended touch, balance, breath, and hearing into a single continuous perception. They felt the slope of the ground through their ankles. They adjusted their center of gravity to predict how a stick might bend or snap. They slowed their breathing to match the rhythm of wind, so their exhale disappeared into ambient noise. They even tasted the air to sense distance to water, smoke, or human presence. Most people think tracking requires strong daylight, but records suggest many of the best trails were followed after sunset. Fresh tracks gave off warmth for a short time. Disturbed soil released a distinct scent. Leaves bent hours earlier still held tension. A broken branch cooled slower on one side, revealing the direction of travel. These are details modern hikers never notice, yet they were obvious clues for those who trained their senses to speak with the land. This is the real twist that most audiences never expect. Darkness didn't weaken native scouts. It heightened them. The night stripped away the noise of the modern world. No bright colors, no loud voices, no competing signals. What remained was pure information, unfiltered and alive. Once you understand how they turned night into a guide, not a threat, the techniques behind silent walking suddenly make perfect scientific sense. And the deeper those techniques go, the more astonishing they become. Most people think silence comes from stepping lightly, but the truth is far deeper. Native scouts didn't simply walk softly. They engineered their entire bodies to disappear into the landscape. Every joint, every breath, every shift of weight was a tool shaped by generations of survival. The first tool wasn't a weapon or an object. It was posture. A straight spine made noise. A lowered center of gravity let weight flow instead of crash. Their knees bent just enough to absorb impact. Their feet landed like falling leaves. And here's the strange part. This posture didn't slow them down. It made them faster because it removed hesitation. Movement became one continuous line drawn through darkness. Another tool lived beneath their feet. Scouts rarely stepped heel first like modern walkers. They used the outer edge of the forefoot to test the ground before committing any weight. If a twig shifted or leaves crackled, the foot froze instantly, hovering like a question mark. That half-second pause saved lives. When the ground was safe, the rest of the foot followed in a slow, rolling motion that matched the texture beneath it. Forests have rhythms, and the scouts stepped to that rhythm, not against it. But there was a second layer to this footwork that few people today ever consider. Native scouts memorized the types of surfaces under their territory. pine needle beds offered silence. Wet moss muted sound. Rotten logs absorbed pressure. Dry oak leaves betrayed everything. Even snow had personalities. Crusted snow cracked sharply. Powder snow sighed. And deep snow swallowed sound entirely. They didn't choose paths randomly. They selected surfaces that cooperated with them, turning the forest floor into an ally. Vision was another tool, but not the way most imagine it. Instead of staring into the dark, scouts shaped their night sight with technique. They shielded their eyes briefly before leaving a bright area to protect their rod cells from bleaching out. They used sidelong glances to detect movement faster. They scanned in small arcs rather than wide sweeps to keep the edges of their vision engaged. And here's the fascinating twist. They often relied more on silhouettes than details. A tree trunk at night is just a vertical shadow. A crouching figure is a broken shadow. A moving animal is a shifting gradient. Those subtle contrasts guided their direction more reliably than any lantern. Hearing played a role just as critical. Scouts cupped their hands slightly behind their ears without raising their arms, using the curvature to collect sound while keeping silhouettes low. They listened not only for noise, but for the absence of noise. A forest full of crickets falling silent meant something moved. A distant owl call answered by another owl with the wrong rhythm meant danger. Even wind carried signals. A sudden warm gust meant nearby open ground. A cold, downward rush meant an approaching ravine. Breath itself became a tool of stealth. Fast breathing echoed inside the body and broke the stillness around them. Scouts trained to breathe low, slow, and through the nose. Their exhale timed to the wind or to their own steps so it vanished under ambient sound. It seems almost unbelievable, controlling breath like a musician tuning an instrument. But that discipline allowed them to move inches from danger without stirring suspicion. The forest also provided external tools. Soft-soled moccasins made from smoked hide allowed maximum feedback from the ground. The thin sole connected scouts directly to soil temperature, subtle vibrations, and surface tension. Some tribes carried small pouches of crushed pine needles to rub on clothing and mask human scent. Others used thin strips of rawhide to tie loose gear, preventing accidental clatter. Even their hair was braided tightly, not for fashion, but to stop strands from catching on branches in the dark. The most overlooked tool, however, was mental mapping. Scouts built internal maps of their territory with such precision that they could walk entire routes without seeing them. Rivers hummed differently at night. Valleys held colder pockets. Hills carried wind from predictable directions. By combining these natural markers, they navigated without hesitation, as if the land itself whispered directions. These tools weren't accessories. They were extensions of the scout's body. A blend of physics, biology, and ancient knowledge working together to create a level of night mobility most modern people would consider impossible. And once these tools shaped the body, the next step was learning how to apply them in real situations, where every decision mattered and silence was more valuable than speed. Using tools is one thing, living them is another. Night in the forest demanded more than knowledge. It demanded instinct shaped through repetition, decision-making under pressure, and movement that never betrayed intention. A single misstep could expose a scout's position, erase hours of tracking, or turn hunter into hunted. That is why application mattered more than theory. Silent walking was not performed occasionally. It was breathed, sharpened, and woven into every step taken after dusk. A scout never entered the forest blindly. Before moving, they paused, letting the night settle, letting their senses calibrate, letting their breath fall into the rhythm of the wind. This first stillness was more than caution. It was alignment. The forest became a partner, not a backdrop. When the temperature dropped, Sound traveled farther, so they slowed. When humidity rose, leaves softened, so they took bolder routes. Each condition told them exactly how fast they could move without being detected. And here's the strange part. They rarely pushed their speed. They matched the forest's speed, which changed minute by minute. Walking itself followed a pattern that looked almost unreal. Scouts placed their foot down in 3 stages: touch, test, commit. The first stage barely brushed the surface, sensitive enough to feel twigs before they snapped. The second stage shifted a small fraction of weight, confirming stability. The final stage rolled the foot forward softly, letting the rest of the body flow behind it. When moving uphill, they used the sides of roots to muffle sound. When moving downhill, they angled their steps to avoid sliding on loose soil. They weren't avoiding the forest. They were negotiating with it. Tracking at night required even more precision. Fresh tracks stayed slightly warmer than untouched ground, so scouts brushed the surface lightly with the back of their hand. If the soil felt recently disturbed, they adjusted their direction. A broken twig pointed the way, but the side holding more condensation revealed when it snapped. Even the smell of turned earth helped determine how long ago a figure passed. It sounds like guesswork to modern ears, but for them it was a practiced dialogue between senses and terrain. When approaching a clearing, scouts never stepped into open moonlight. They circled the edge, keeping to shadowed borders where trees broke the glow into scattered fragments. They moved only when clouds covered the moon or when wind rustled branches loudly enough to mask their steps. If a bird startled, they froze instantly, because sudden flight usually meant someone else had moved. Silence became both shield and radar. Communication in complete darkness carried its own rules. Spoken words carried too far, so scouts used soft throat clicks, barely audible beyond a few meters. The sounds blended with insects and night birds, making them nearly impossible for outsiders to identify. A short click meant stop. A longer one meant shift direction. A double click meant danger. These cues happened quietly enough to maintain stealth while still coordinating movement through dense terrain. Their bodies became instruments tuned to the environment. They crouched low when moving across dry leaves, letting their weight spread horizontally. They crawled when the ground turned brittle, distributing pressure across knees and palms instead of feet. They sidestepped when passing thorn bushes, avoiding the telltale snap of brittle stems. A scout in full flow looked less like a person and more like a shadow pulled forward by intention alone. Night vision played a role in every decision. Instead of focusing on objects, scouts scanned for shapes that didn't belong. Straight lines in a round world, dark masses blocking lighter backgrounds, or sudden breaks in the tree pattern. These anomalies revealed hidden camps, animals, or approaching strangers long before direct eye contact occurred. And when they needed to blend completely, they simply stopped moving. Stillness was the perfect camouflage. Shadows do not breathe loudly, and neither did they. In the most dangerous situations, close to an enemy camp, or while tracking a wounded animal, they shifted from walking to drifting. Steps timed to natural forest sounds. Exhales buried inside gusts of wind. Hands careful not to brush bark. Clothing held tight against the body to prevent scraping. In these moments, the line between human and environment blurred until even trained eyes could not separate them from the night. This was application, not performance, not theory, but a living choreography inside darkness. And once you understand how these behaviors worked together, the advantages native scouts held become almost impossible to overstate. Silent walking was never just a technique. It was a survival advantage so profound that entire generations depended on it. The benefits reached far beyond moving quietly or seeing in the dark. They reshaped the balance between people and landscape, allowing scouts to travel, hunt, defend, and protect without revealing their presence. And here's the quiet truth. Those who mastered the night held power even in daylight. The first benefit was safety. A scout who could move without sound avoided danger before danger even noticed. They slipped past predators, skirted enemy patrols, and kept families safe during migrations. Silence wasn't only stealth, it was early warning. If the forest stayed calm, the path stayed safe. If birds stopped singing, danger approached. This living feedback loop turned every journey into a predictable pattern rather than a gamble. Hunting changed as well. Animals that relied on hearing had no defense against feet that touched the ground like falling feathers. A deer that spooked too easily during the day could be approached at night for when it trusted the darkness more than its ears. The odd part is that silent walking didn't just hide the hunters. It calmed the land around them. The forest recognized predictable noise as natural, and scouts used that trust to come closer than modern hunters ever could. During conflict, the benefits magnified. An opposing force moving loudly at night exposed its position instantly. But a group of native scouts who understood shadow blending and coordinated silence became almost impossible to track. They could approach from angles enemy lookouts never expected. They could retreat without leaving a trail. They could flank, observe, or disappear with such precision that even experienced trackers struggled to interpret their path. Many historical accounts describe enemies hearing no approach, only arrival. Navigation also became easier. Night vision trained the eyes to follow faint star reflections on water, pale moss on tree bark, or the direction of the wind moving across tall grass. Scouts saved time and energy by cutting straight paths through terrain most people avoided after sunset. The forest stopped being a maze. It became a map. But the greatest benefit was psychological. Moving silently through darkness required a level of calm that shaped the mind as much as the body. Scouts learned patience deeper than fear, focus stronger than noise, and confidence rooted in understanding rather than force. That mindset carried into every aspect of life: hunting, leadership, diplomacy, and teaching. Silence became a teacher itself, showing young people how to listen before acting, observe before judging, and read the world before stepping into it. Families thrived because of this knowledge. Hunters returned with more food. Villages stayed safe during tense seasons. Children grew up understanding that the land wasn't something to conquer. It was something to move with. And that relationship created communities that survived not by overpowering nature, but by cooperating with it. The benefits of silent walking and night vision weren't momentary. They were generational, cultural, strategic, and deeply human. Skills that protected entire nations in darkness became principles that shaped their daylight lives. Long before anyone wrote manuals on stealth or studied human perception, native scouts were already living the science. Yet the deeper you look, the clearer one truth becomes. Silent walking and night vision were never just physical skills. They were cultural mirrors, reflecting a worldview built on respect, patience, and the belief that harmony could be stronger than force. The forest was not an obstacle to conquer. It was a companion teaching lessons that echoed through generations. When a scout moved through darkness without fear, it wasn't bravery alone. It was trust. Trust in their senses, trust in the land, and trust in the knowledge passed down from elders who had walked the same trails under the same stars. Every quiet step carried the memory of those before them. Every shadow they blended into held stories thousands of years old. Silence became a form of heritage, not a tactic. Here's the surprising part. These teachings didn't disappear when the sun rose. The discipline learned at night shaped how communities lived during the day. Scouts who trained their senses to stay calm under pressure grew into leaders who listened before speaking. Hunters who learned to wait for the right moment became planners who respected timing in every decision. Children raised to read the forest at night grew into adults who read people with the same depth of perception. Silent walking wasn't only survival, it was wisdom in motion, and that wisdom carried a deeper message. The world reveals its secrets to those who move gently. Whether tracking a deer, approaching a river, or walking through darkness with no more than a heartbeat for company, knowledge came from attention, not domination. The forest responded to those who respected its rhythms. Noise was a form of disrespect. Quiet was a form of gratitude. In our modern world, filled with constant sound, bright screens, and rushing footsteps, the old skills feel almost impossible. Yet the lesson behind them is timeless. Slow down. Notice details. Listen to what lives underneath the surface. Silent walking taught that clarity appears when distraction fades. Night vision taught that darkness is not the enemy, but another kind of light waiting to be understood. This is why the legacy matters. These skills were not accidents. They were scientific observations, refined through culture, shaped through necessity, and carried with dignity. They remind us that human beings once moved in harmony with nature so deeply that even the night could not hide from them. The forest still holds that knowledge. The darkness still speaks in the same language. And the footsteps of those scouts, soft, measured, almost invisible, still echo across landscapes that remember more than we think. We honor that legacy not by copying their steps, but by learning from their relationship with the world. A relationship built on respect, understanding, and a profound belief that silence is also a form of strength. Because in the end, the lesson remains simple. The night is not empty, it is alive. And for those who know how to move within it, it reveals everything.